beware of ancient Greeks bearing gifts, but perhaps just beware of gifts full stop. It's a somewhat unfestive Minisode on the Ancient History Hound podcast. Hi and welcome, my name's Neil, and if you listened to my previous episode in the Ancient Sicily mini-series, you might have heard me state that this was probably it for 2024. Well, a few days later, whilst walking the dog, I thought, why not do a very short and impromptu episode which links in with this time of year? Now, I've recorded an episode on the Saturnalia and the Hallua, both really interesting midwinter festivals. If you're interested in what Romans were buying each other and a bunch of other stuff, then I strongly recommend you listen to the episode on the Saturnalia. If you're interested in a bunch of Greek women partying hard and being encouraged to use disgusting language, then there's the Hallua. Of course, why not listen to both? In this minisode, I've strung together some examples of gifts in ancient Mesopotamia and Greece with a focus on where these might go wrong. As mentioned, this is a bit of an experimental episode, a lot shorter than normal and perhaps less serious. So let me know what you think, and you can do exactly that on X, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Threads and Blue Sky, where I am at Ancient Blogger. There's also my website, ancientblogger.com. You can email me at ancientblogger@hotmail.com. And this podcast has a growing subreddit called Ancient History Hound. As for reviews and ratings, you know the drill. Where you can, please leave some, because it makes things so much easier for me in terms of getting new listeners. And as ever, new listeners, hello and welcome. But older listeners or returning listeners, thanks for coming back. Okay then, let's get to it. Gifts and antiquity might cover a range of contexts. Often you'll hear a gift where it might relate, for example, to a characteristic afforded to a person by the gods. But I'm looking at the more tangible. And we know that people were giving people things a long time ago. It's part of the human condition, I think. Take a bronze stork found in modern-day Bulgaria, which is dated to between 1500 and 1200 BC. This is largely speculated as a plaything. More certain is a wooden figure of a cat or lion with a mouth which could be opened. This dates to around the same period, but this time from Thebes in Egypt. Finally, there's a toy carriage found in a child's tomb at Sogmatar in modern-day Turkey, which dates to around 3000 BC. An obvious difficulty is that these were made of materials which wouldn't always survive to the modern day. So here I'll be picking up on where these gifts are mentioned, because as it turns out, gifts are mentioned quite a bit. Some of these tablets date to the 19th to 16th centuries BC. An individual in one such tablet, called Adad Abum, asks for a fine string of beads to be worn around the head in a letter, or rather a tablet, to someone, presumably his father. And I quote, "I have never before written to you for something precious I wanted, but if you want to be like a father to me, get me a fine string full of beads to wear around the head, seal it with your seal, and give it to the carrier of this tablet so that he can bring it to me." End quote. Gifts were something exchanged and pleaded for, and in this instance on the personal level, but they were also part of a wider diplomatic framework. Rulers, ambassadors and nobles exchanged them as a mode of mutual recognition and general diplomacy. But of course, this didn't always go well. Take Zimri Lim, a ruler of Mari in the 18th century BC, which was a city-state in modern-day Syria. Here was an individual who boasted of being the first to have an ice house on the Euphrates, where ice could be collected from the mountains and kept cool for the summer. A man, you might think, of good taste. However, one tablet recorded how he sent Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, a pair of Cretan boots. These were returned with no reason given, and it might be worth knowing that in 1762 BC, Hammurabi sacked Mauri, and Zimri Lim is not heard of again. In a less dramatic fashion, in the Middle Babylonian period, roughly the 16th to 12th centuries BC, the king of Cyprus sent an apology to the king of Egypt for lacking something in a gift. He could only gift him 500 pounds of copper due to a pestilence which had disrupted copper production on the island. Continuing the trend was the harassment of Takuli, an ambassador from Ugarit, a city in northern modern-day Syria. He was manhandled by the Hittite king due to the poor quality of lapis lazuli sent there. The falling out over gifts was a thing which played a part in one of the most famous works of ancient history. In Homer's Iliad, the hero Achilles sulks from battle because Agamemnon has taken a slave girl from him. Eventually, Agamemnon realizes his error and makes a substantial offer to Achilles: bars of gold, tripods, cauldrons, horses, slaves, and when Troy is taken, a choice share of more or less everything. But this is refused, and the reason Achilles rejects this over-generous offer reveals how the Greeks might view gifts as something which reflected status, something between equals. One argument has it that the initial act of Agamemnon relegated him to something less than an equal in the eyes of Achilles. As such, the gifts from him aren't what might repair the situation, because Achilles doesn't see Agamemnon in that way anymore. He's not an equal to him, and therefore the gifts are largely, well, not quite worthless, but they don't have the weight that they should have. Something we forget about in Homer is his sense of humour, and one gift exchange, this time between equals, is a great example. In the Iliad, the Greek hero Diomedes, a favourite of mine, meets Glaucus, who fights on the side of the Trojans. Before they fight, the pair share introductions, and then realise that their grandfathers were very good friends. This changes the situation entirely, and the two agree not to fight and instead exchange gifts. Homer comments that Zeus had stolen the wits from Glaucus, as he swapped his golden gear, which we understand as his armour, for the bronze armour of Diomedes. Not a fair trade by any measure. Gifts amongst nobles were an important way of keeping good relations. At the funeral games of Patroclus, these take the form of prizes, and of course, being Greeks, there are plenty of tantrums. Menelaus throws a spectacular one when he competes in the chariot race and comes behind Antilochus. But possibly the biggest sulk over a lost prize comes in the Odyssey. When Odysseus speaks with the dead, he appeals to the shade of Ajax, who had fallen out with him over the armour of Achilles. Will Ajax finally get over it and chat with the one living person who everyone else, all those other shades, are clamouring to talk to? Of course not. The shade of Ajax just wanders off. Perhaps I've been a bit facetious with regards to the sulk Ajax was in. In the Odyssey, this instance, the falling out over the armour and gear of Achilles, is referred to as driving Ajax to his tragic end. As I've mentioned, gifts and prizes could be a sort of currency of status, and status was incredibly important in the Homeric code. We understand this more in the play by Sophocles in the 5th century BC called Ajax, where he is driven to madness partially as a result of this, and sadly takes his own life. Another tragedy from the 5th century BC has gifts as an important plot point. Medea, in the play of the same name by Euripides, is able to take revenge on Jason through her actions against his bride-to-be. It's an inversion of a norm we see today: wedding gifts, in this instance a golden coronet and a dress, both items which will have a horrifying outcome for both the bride-to-be and her father. These are delivered by Medea's own sons, and what's worth noting here is that the fate of her sons are also part of her revenge against Jason. As such, the elements of Medea's horrifying plans are all present in this act: the wedding gifts, which will end the life of the bride-to-be, and her sons taking them, who will also fall at her hand later on. One infamous wedding gift in Greek myth had similar potency as those of Medea, but the effects weren't as immediate. Harmonia, the goddess of harmony, and in particular marital harmony, was the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. As you might expect, Hephaestus, who was actually Aphrodite's husband, wasn't entirely happy with all of this, and when she married Cadmus, the legendary founder of Thebes, Hephaestus made Harmonia a necklace as a wedding present. Except this wasn't your everyday necklace. It was cursed, and the wearers of it were doomed to suffer calamities and all sorts of, bad outcomes. A good example being one such owner, Jocasta, the mother of Oedipus. Another gift with a tragic outcome is found in Women of Trachis, another play by Sophocles. This is a gift with a twist, and perhaps here the terrifying nature of it was that it was something which members of the audience might themselves have tried or used. A love potion. The story behind the love potion perhaps held a clue that it wasn't really what it said on the bottle. When Deianira, the wife of Heracles, was abducted by a centaur called Nessus, he was killed by Heracles. The item used was an arrow which had been dipped in the blood of the Hydra. As he lay breathing his last, Nessus told Deianira that if she collected the blood from around the arrowhead, it could be used as a powerful love potion or salve to recapture the heart of Heracles. As you've guessed, this came to be used by Deianira, but not before she realizes her mistake. The fact that Nessus had told her to keep this salve out of sunlight, away from heat, and not to touch it, didn't ring the alarm bells you think it might have done. After dipping some wool in the salve, she spread it on a tunic, a gift for Heracles. The horrible realization of the effects of the salve came when she noticed what had happened to the piece of wool she'd used. When it was exposed to sunlight, it crumbled into dust and powder. It was obviously too late to do anything, and Deianira soon received the news about Heracles. Whilst Heracles was making a sacrifice near a pyre, the tunic soaked with the supposed love salve began to burn, and this sent him into an agonizing rage which he couldn't escape. The outcome was bad for everyone. Racked with guilt, Deianira took her life, and Heracles had to end his on a pyre, the only way that he could stop the pain. Not wishing to denigrate a demigod, but when I was 10 I got a bottle of Old Spice for Christmas, and unwittingly decided to try it. Not exactly the same, I realise and understand, but then again, I'm not exactly a demigod. My final example of a gift gone wrong is actually one of the most famous gifts in myth gone right. The Trojan horse. I'll spare you the details as you're probably well acquainted with it, but what you might not know is that this doesn't feature in the poem of the Iliad. The Iliad only takes us up to the death of Hector, so the death of Achilles, the Trojan horse and the sack of Troy comes much later on in the wider myth of the Trojan War. The Trojan horse is mentioned fleetingly in Homer's Odyssey, but we get much of the standard myth of the horse from Virgil's Aeneid, a later Roman poet. This leads me to a point I often make, and something I often see on social media, on forums, and pretty much everywhere. The perception that myth was standardized in antiquity. There was one version of a myth from one particular individual. Very often that's not the case. A myth might be built from several different fragments or sources, and sometimes myths contrast and contradict each other depending on the source that you read. And on that point, I come to the end of this experimental and impromptu episode. Let me know if you liked it, because doing this sort of thing does open up different opportunities. I could do short, bite-sized episodes about things that don't always take up 30 or 40 minutes. It gives me a wide range of new opportunities to bring you different types of content. In any case, I hope you have a great time over the festive period, even if it does involve the occasional weird gift. Till next time, keep safe and stay well.